Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smoko podcast. My name is Alexis Armstrong, your host. Nice to meet you. The Smoko podcast is the place to celebrate and highlight women, trans women, and non binary folk working within STEM and trade occupations. So please tune in, join us, take a break. We're on Smoko. And today we are extremely lucky to be joined by the lovely Dr. Melissa Berke, who is an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences at the University of Notre Dame. Her research is specific to understanding paleoclimate and paleoenvironmental change, and she uses both isotopic and organic geochemical proxies from lacustrine and marine sediments. So she's going to talk about all things that today. She also looks at the tropical water cycle and the associated landscape variability and how that changes with time. So we're going to talk about that, which is really exciting, and basically talk all things for research, geosciences, and her experience within academia and teaching. And if you're hearing a fire alarm this entire time, that is because my building is testing it. So apologies in advance. If you hear that, we're not in danger. There's nothing on fire. There's just going to be an annoying test throughout this interview. But Melissa, so
Hi,
nice to have you on the show. Thank you for
nice
coming
to be
out.
here. Thank you so much.
It's so lovely to see you again. Me and Melissa, we met way back now, I think in like
2016.
2016
Yep. Yeah.
on my first expedition on the JR, and we sailed on expedition 361
hmm
from Mauritius to Cape Town. So it was absolutely lovely. It was so nice sailing with you. It was such
Yeah.
a good first experience, first expedition. It was freaking stellar. It was a good one.
Yeah. For me too. It was a great expedition. Great people.
It was
Yeah.
really good. And maybe Melissa, to start us off, I think it might be a little bit repetitive question on my end. I ask everybody this, but I'm just
hmm
genuinely so excited. Could you describe how you first discovered the field of paleoclimate and geochemistry, how you got into this, and why did you fall in love with this specialty?
Yeah. I mean, so we'll work backwards.
Yeah.
So I'm an organic geochemist, or the specific type of geochemistry I do. And when I started my PhD, so I knew at that point I wanted to be a paleoclimatologist, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I thought, oh, I'll do some sort of paleoclimatology. And my advisor was like, oh, there's this project and, it's using organic geochemistry. And I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. I don't want to be an organic geochemist. And so I trained up, I started the project, I kind of
Mhm.
learned about the tool, what I could do with it. And so, fast forward a year into the project, and I was like, I changed my mind. I love this. I want to be an organic geochemist. Like, this is what I want to do. And so, it took the year of like hands-on, like sinking into it to be like, this is what I was meant to do after I've done a wide variety of types of geology. And so,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, it was actually it being suggested to me and me saying it was horrible for me to get exposed to what I actually now love to do. And then
Oh.
paleoclimatology came, I actually heard a seminar back when I was a master's student doing something unrelated about environmental change sorts of research, and climate change being a big driver of that environmental change, that actually kind of lit the spark about,
Mm.
pursuing climate change research.
I love that you were like, absolutely not. I'm not
I
touching
mean,
organic
I know
geochemistry.
there are people out there who are like, oh God, that sounds like, they'll either say organic chemistry was my worst class in school.
Mm-hmm.
I get that a lot. And I'm like, I
Me
promise
too.
I only do the stuff that's relevant to be able to say something about, like, we don't just do esoteric
Chemistry for
organic chemistry.
chemistry.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
we want it to be applied, like to be able to learn something about past climate, past environmental change. And so I have deep appreciation for the people who do the like seminal work that my work builds on.
Uh-huh.
But I am definitely a user. I'm a user of the organic geochemistry. So
I love that because I think that's so truthful to a lot of people who do chemistry, myself included. I fought tooth and nail. I was like, please, like, I'm just a biologist and a geologist. Please don't make me take
yeah,
it.
and
Like,
I as an
oh,
undergraduate, I went through school as a geologist, and I took a
mm,
lot of chemistry and biology. So it's a very interdisciplinary field that I'm in now. But I
mhm.
actually thought chemistry was fascinating because it was so difficult. It did not come naturally to me. It really took a lot of work. But when I would figure it out, I'd be like, wow, that's actually really cool. And so I've always wanted to do geology, but it was the chemistry aspect that was a learned skill later, a
Yeah.
fine appreciation for it.
It was kind of forced down
Yeah.
on you in your first year PhD, and then you were like, "Okay, fine." Like, what was the switch? Was it because you could use it and it told you so much information about geology and because it was so applied? Is that kinda like what snuck up on you that you were like, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I actually love this?"
Yeah, I mean, it's the tools kind of under this umbrella of organic geochemistry are so varied, all sorts of different time periods and all different locations that we can apply them. And so really it was starting to read those papers and kind
Mm,
of see what was out there, what was available to me, that I realized, oh, this doesn't pigeonhole me. This actually, I can still do field work, I can do
yeah.
lab work, I then combine the two in all sorts of different places and times. And like that, really the fact that it can be so widely used is really what sold me.
That's very cool, yeah, because it
Mhm.
does kinda broaden your scope. It's another, like,
Right.
toolkit marker. And
Yep.
maybe for someone who doesn't know what organic geochemistry is and, like, in terms of geology, could you explain what that kinda tool is and how you use it?
Yeah, so we often say that we use biomarkers or sedimentary biomarkers, geologic biomarkers, which are these compounds and compound classes that get preserved for millions of years, that can be found in geologic materials, that can be
Mhm.
linked back to specific organisms or groups of organisms.
So
And so
cool.
it's their preservation for really long periods of times that makes them so useful. And the
Mm.
fact that we know either the groups or types of or species sometimes that produce them, that lead us to be able to use them as such a great tool. So yeah, the study of organic geochemistry is using these, in my field, using these biomarkers to be able to reconstruct past climate environmental change.
So cool, and it is so interdisciplinary. That alone is, yeah, chemistry, biology, and geology, but
Mm-hmm.
it's giving you a marker for so many different types of data because it's so interdisciplinary that you could do temperature, you could do environment, and you can do, like, long-term time scale as well. So, like, that's really cool,
Yeah.
and I love that you did eventually fall in love with it, and and I think maybe this is like the second question is I know geology, especially if you're outside of it and in old mentality, was so pigeonholed and so narrow to be like what geology is and like what it entails to be a geologist. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that you once were told by, I hope they're watching now, by a terrible person that told you that you had no place in geology because you didn't excel at traditional field mapping. And unfortunately, I think that old mindset sometimes is still alive in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could speak to if someone is going through the same situation or maybe feels the same way because someone's told them that as well. Could you describe how the industry has changed, how that's no longer applicable, and like what are the options? I mean, you're a geochemist and a paleoceanographer. Like that exists that's outside of traditional mapping.
So yeah, so I made it. Woohoo!
Yeah,
I win. I win.
100%. Yes, you
I'm
do.
still here, and they don't
Notre
win.
Dame.
So
Yeah, I'm at Notre
so
Dame as a
yeah.
professor.
And so I would say to anyone going through the same thing, block out the noise, right, as much
Mm,
as you can. Find your people, find your support network, ping your ideas off of them or your insecurities off of them, because we've all got them. And so find the people who will support you. And then block out everyone else, right? You may think maybe this isn't for me because I don't actually enjoy it. Because really, I think
mm,
when it all boils down to it, if you enjoy it, even if it's not your strength, but you actually see development, you actually see yourself kind of getting something and then moving to the next thing, then no one can tell you, right, that's not for
yeah,
you. If you start being like, this is actually more pain, more suffering than enjoyment, then
yeah.
switch to something else, either within geology. There's so many things. I tell this to students all the time, that the super interdisciplinary nature of geology, right, that we've learned, and
Mm,
how much we all rely on different fields and incorporate them into our own, is such that geologists goes to carbon capture industry, goes to NASA, goes to academics, goes to government,
mm.
so many things you can go into. And so there's absolutely space for everyone in this field. And how you define what it is that you're interested in is really, I mean, the sky is the limit. So yeah.
That's an amazing answer, and thank you so much for talking about it because I know that's super powerful for people going through it. And unfortunately, sometimes there is that rigidity, but you're right. It's basically is a make your own adventure
Mm-hmm.
science because there's so many different ways that you can go into it. I started out traditionally mapping. Wasn't for me either. I wasn't really a huge fan of it. And I took the same advice that you just said of like, it wasn't something that I was enjoying. I was okay at it and good at it, but it wasn't really for me. I ended up going into like data science really and database science, and I loved it. I loved just like the nerdy aspects of like programming something, and I was like completely different, but still geoscience related. So I think that's a fantastic advice. I really, really do. And I love also block out the haters and find your people and just don't listen to the noise because it's just that it is noise.
Yep. No, and that's, there's trying to think, the Institute for Diversity in Geoscience or something like that,
Mm,
which has a T-shirt that says "Geology is for everyone." And like, there's nothing that to me rings more true, right? Like, you do not have to be a field scientist. I think that was also pretty standard. People thought like, if you
yeah.
don't like the outdoors, you have no place in geology. Well, I always liked the outdoors. That
Yeah.
wasn't my issue. I just didn't like field mapping. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean if you don't like the outdoors that there isn't tons of subdisciplines in geology that could use your help. So
Hmm.
there's room for
No,
everyone here.
I think that's so true, and I think that motto and that T-shirt is worth its weight in gold because it's
Hmm.
right. Like, and I think that's kind of the new change that we need to make as an industry and as a science. It's moved past just one model of traditional field mapping, and there's so much more out there that we can do. And again, fantastic advice, and maybe this will lead us to the next one of like what else, because I know you have nothing but great advice for your students because you're currently an assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences at the University of Notre Dame, where you do both teaching and research. Do you have kind of a favorite like advice or subject or topic to teach to your students? And then if so, why is it your favorite? Is it maybe something foundational or like building block, or is it something that you get to see their little minds explode and they learn something completely new? Or is it more personal development like this that geology is for everyone and they can do anything?
Yeah, there's the light bulb, of course, that everyone always talks about, right? When some student gets it. I think really just mentoring people to finding what
Mm,
it is that they love to me is one of the most powerful things that I can do. And so yeah, again, I like to find out, everyone is different. Everyone comes into
mm,
it, kind of with their own strengths and weaknesses. And so, it's both one of the really challenging aspects, I think, of this job is, some people want to meet every week and other people that's like way too hands on. And so, I mean, so figuring out what each person's, what their hopes are and what their kind of style is actually
mm.
really, to me, that's, getting to that point where you've kind of worked with them to figure that out is one of the things that I actually really enjoy and hopefully am always constantly improving at.
That's a really, really good one. And it's a very, very hard one. I couldn't imagine how challenging that would be because it's basically customizing their learning to what works for them, what wasn't, and it's probably not really communicated. It's probably a little bit of trial and error per student and
Hmm.
per advisor to be like, okay, was that too much of the email? Do they want to
Right.
like me to be in their lab with them or with their samples? I love that idea of mentorship and that idea of customizable education. And I think that is testament to you being a good teacher. You know what I mean? Like you just know instantly if someone gives you that answer to be like, I like, and what's challenging is customizing education to be like, oh yeah, you're stellar.
I feel like we're always learning and we're always trying to improve. And one of the things I did after I was here for a little while was prep like an intro to grad school handbook. Kind of, here are my expectations, here's yours, like here's how I learn, but like how do you learn? Here's what a day-to-day life in a grad student would be like, to try and put us on the same page. And it's kind of like when
Yeah.
you're a university student starting out and the prof goes over the syllabus. It's kind of like, here's kind of the lowdown on how this is going to go, and then we figure it out as we go along, but like here's what you need to know to feel like we're all starting on the same page.
Honestly, Melissa, that is so useful because I think that's the big scary thing about grad school when you start grad studies is that it's your first introduction to research and you have
Hmm.
no idea what that means, how to schedule your research, what goes into it, and also how grad school works and like what's your expectations? Are you going to publish? What is your deadline? Like I had to have multiple times that my advisor had to bring me back to the light because it was so free reign that
Right.
he was like, I know that you haven't been in the lab for a week. And have found out from your friend that you have discovered the show Battlestar
Yeah.
Galactica. And that's all you've been doing for 2 weeks. So, chop chop. Like, I need 2 chapters from you. So, you need to get your butt in the lab. Like, that's very useful. That's a very useful guide to give to your grad students. I think that's amazing. And maybe pivoting away a little bit from the teaching aspect, could you kind of dive in more about your research because it's specific to tropical water cycle and associated landscape variability? Could you explain what this means and then what this entails? And maybe let's start with what is the tropical water cycle because I'm sure a lot of people have never heard that term
Yeah.
in their life before.
I would say it's one of the things that I love a lot. So not all of my work is related to the tropical water cycle, but one of my favorite aspects is the water cycle, kind of broadly defined, is ultimate recycling, right? It is water from precipitation, falling on the landscape, kind of moving along the landscape, ending up in a water body, an ocean or a lake, and evaporation. And so that constant percolation into the ground and reuse and that sort of thing, moving around, that cycle in continuity, just moving, is the water cycle. And
Okay.
so I really like thinking about and studying the tropical water cycle because climate change in the tropics is often reflected in changes in the water cycle. The tropics right today are pretty constant temperature, right? You go in the summer there, it's warm.
Yeah.
You go in the winter, it's warm. And
It's
so it's
humid.
really, yeah, exactly. It's not really like, the seasons like we might think of here in Indiana. And so, but where they see climate change, right, and they see kind of day-to-day weather is in changes in water delivery, both how much,
Monsoons.
when it comes,
Yeah.
yep, and like the impacts of that. So the tropical water cycle is just that cycle going on in the tropics where it is such a fingerprint of climate change in the region.
Could you kind of explain like what this actually entails, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
of like how do you research this? How do you study it? Do you use certain geochemical markers? How does that work?
So my work is, we use the mud from the bottoms of lakes and oceans, right? That we can subsection, so take small slices of mud that, the top is related to most recent, right? It was deposited most recently, and the bottom is deposited most long ago. And we can section it out. You can think of that as like tiny slices. And then we look for these organic markers, so these biomarkers, as I mentioned before. And the biomarkers, depending on what we're looking for, can actually tell us about kind of that water signature. So the amount that came, the path it took to get there. And so specifically, I use, which will
Cool.
really terrify people, but it's actually the waxy coating on leaves. So if you
Oh,
look
I
at any,
remember.
yeah, if you look
Hmm.
at any leaf right after rainfall, if you go outside and you look at like a blade of grass and a drop of leaf is stuck on it,
Hmm.
that the reason that it doesn't just like fall off, or the fact it beat it up, right, is this waxy coating that keeps the plant from drying out. And it turns out that waxy coating, the plant makes it. So all plants make these, and it makes it kind of with the water that the plant got, right, that it used.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that then can tell us actually about the water that was available to it at the time.
That's
And
so
so,
cool.
yeah,
Like
right. And
that
then
is
like,
so
yeah,
freaking cool.
it's
And
so,
then
I mean, yeah. I was going to say the weird thing is that
yeah.
it's like that never goes away. Like that plant can be long gone, and the wax actually is like sticks around for millions of years, long after the plant can get degraded. And so that
Whoa.
water signature, right? That kind of
Yeah.
fossilized um, fossilized clues of past water movement we then can use to talk about the past water cycle.
That is so freaking cool. Do you have any like degradation? Because I know like with carbonates and with like diagenesis, you'll lose
Mhm.
some preservation of that signature. Do you have any like changes to the wax or is it perfectly preserved or are you looking for certain types of environment for better preservation?
I mean, so the kind of, I don't know, basic answer would be like we can look to see if we have any degradation. So broadly, it gives us a clue based on how it looks when we run the sample on the instrument that it's a preserved signal
Okay.
of the past. But yeah, there are definitely, places where it gets preserved better. We know we lose organic matter through degradation, microbial
Mhm.
munching, right? Like
Yeah.
as it's drifting through the water
Yeah, it
column,
slowly just gets
gets
disintegrated in a
most of it
mess.
gets
Yes.
eaten, yeah, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
redissolved and things like
Yeah.
that. So, but there we can look for clues to be able to say like, no, this is actually really well preserved, and the molecules are actually the ones that I just told you about from
Hmm.
leaf waxes are actually really robust. They stick around. And so things like the opposite end of the spectrum
Cool.
that many people have heard of, think like ancient DNA, things
Hmm.
like Jurassic Park, that, that's actually a really not robust molecule. And so it actually needed to be, protected or needs to be protected in the casement of amber
Hmm.
for us, the mud actually does the trick, and we can then go and reconstruct that past water cycle and other things too, right? Each layer contains
Yeah.
not just those lipids, those markers,
Mhm.
but many others too. And that's, I think, what like the real power is, being able to take one sample and turn it into lots of different types of data.
And that, like, we're going back again to that, like, interdisciplinary aspect of geology. I mean, you just talked about, like, plant biology and then paleo and then water cycle. That one thing that you mentioned that I thought was really cool, and I would love to know a little bit more about it, is that from like reconstructing this water cycle history through plant wax cover, because they have that perfect preservation of the water that they were created in or that they were exposed to. You said that you could also see the cycle, or like the where it's been along the pathway of water. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so the signature that the wax presents to us, right, that we see, we use stable isotopes. Basically, this value, this number that we get from looking at the wax, right, the specific kind of carbons and hydrogens in these chain links that the wax
Mhm.
makes, it actually is recording kind of the general evaporation and then rain out. So the transit
Oh,
history of that water. And
okay.
so you can do kind of the reconstruction, like I mentioned. You can also then do what they call isotope enabled models to kind of see where that signature might most likely be transported from, to kind of give you an idea of, yeah, amount, location, where it might have come from, kind of
Whoa.
regionally, and that
Yeah.
sort of detail.
That is very nuanced past data. Like, that's really, really cool for understanding the whole mapping of it, of exactly where this water is coming from and, yeah, where, when, how much water was deposited. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have a full geologic cycle because you're now looking at all of these sediments, that preservation of sediments. That's really, really cool, Melissa. That's fantastic research. And
Yeah, it's definitely like a mystery, right? It's a mystery we are constantly trying to unravel. So
not only is it like super interesting data and it's like understanding this kind of preservation mystery, but it's also really important because it's a fingerprint of tropical climate change and what climate change looks like in the tropics. Why is this something that people should be interested in? How does this affect the public? And then, yeah, what should they understand about it?
yeah, I mean, so our hope is, right, to be able to understand how the water delivery, water cycle has changed, right? And so,
Mhm.
this idea that climate change is felt in changes in the water cycle in the tropics so severely is really the right kind of the kicker, like why
Mhm.
why this is important. And
Yeah.
so, if it's important in the past, right, and we can talk about the environment's boundaries of kind of, if water amount changes this way, animals and maybe early humans or whatever time slice we're talking about. But it also matters for today and also moving into the future, right? And so if climate change impacts the water cycle now and in the past,
Mhm.
we know that moving forward, it's going to be kind of a key player in human life, right? And so much human suffering related to too much or too little water is going to be seen, right? I don't know, I think human empathy, right, as a
Yeah.
scientist, telling people this is about humanity, right, and about helping
Mhm.
people and about knowing the kind of boundaries of our environment and kind of where and what we might expect with climate change is really key in studying the water cycle or anything having to do with climate change, because we do know, if you change when your water comes, right, when your precipitation comes, and you've just all planted your crops, you either get a deluge and like the monsoon comes at the wrong time compared to normal and it washes all your seeds away, or floods the whole landscape, or no rain comes, right? And so
Mhm.
it's really not just about how much rain, but really the when
Timing
the
of it.
rain comes, it's really important. And I'm just thinking that, one of the other things that really kind of comes to mind is, I think there's like a misunderstanding when we talk about climate change. People think it's going to be this like snap, like bam, climate change now.
Yeah.
Or when we talk about sea level rise, right? This is a big deal, right?
Mhm.
With, putting ice cap water back into the oceans, we will see and are seeing already,
A
amounts
rise.
of sea
Yeah.
level increasing, right? And so, coastal cities will be impacted, as well as, transport and everything else. And I think there's this misunderstanding that that's going to, it's just going to be one giant, like, boom, like water up,
Yeah.
as opposed to what we actually see, which is, you know,
Gradual.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Or these, I'm thinking about the images of like the New York City, subway, where there's like standing water for 2 or 3 days. And then, it recedes and everyone's like, okay, go back to normal. But those events in all of our coastal cities around the world are going to become more and more frequent. All right. And it's understanding that, yes, it's happening and then the rate is happening very quickly. But we're not talking about like a finger snaps and
Yeah.
like it is climate change now. We're
We
talking
have
about,
entered the period
yeah,
of climate
exactly.
change. Yeah, like
Right.
very
Yeah,
robotic. Hmm.
exactly. And so I think understanding rates, rates of water delivery and the
Hmm.
time scale of these things is kind of, what we try and communicate when, the details of our work towards the, general people who are like, wait, monsoon? What? Water?
Yeah. How
Yeah.
is this related? Yeah. How
Right.
are like you studying these lake sediments
Yep.
related to the amount of water, one, and then related to monsoons and what's going to happen in the future? It's just, it
Right.
seems very distended. So it's nice to
Yep.
have this communication breakdown to be like,
Right.
it's that type of research is so important because it predicts future events. And these future events, we all live on this planet, has real world impacts and
Hmm.
has like high stakes for human suffering and potential loss of life, potential loss of income, loss of economy, loss of farm and resources, right? Like
Hmm.
they do have a full system that it affects.
Right. Yep. I think especially a lot of times, like I'm not coastal, right? Lake Michigan's close, but it's not,
Hmm.
it's not an ocean and it's still
Yeah.
pretty far away. And so people are like, well, is it going to affect me? And it's like, well, it'll affect everyone, but at different,
Yeah.
people who are living kind of already at the margins or whose climate is already like, everything needs to happen just right with the right amount of rain at the right time. Like that's who's going to suffer the most, and
Hmm.
recognizing that matters, right? Even if it's not you, millions of people will suffer, and that still is important and matters. So,
That's what makes it completely worth it to do this research. Like, bar
yep.
none, there should be no hesitation that this is important and we need to do it because millions of people, their livelihood is at stake. And
Hmm.
hopefully that's changed post COVID, of this idea of if it doesn't affect me, it's still affecting a lot of other people and that will
Hmm.
have effects on the world. And I think that idea that you brought up of it's climate change now and people think that it's like a snap decision. I think that's really true. Is people do think that it's kind of a binary thing that we're going to go from right now, which is apparently climate change free, which it's not,
Hmm.
to then all of a sudden like apocalyptic climate change. And you're like, no, we're already kind of started and it's going to be kind of almost stochastic a little bit. It's going to
Hmm.
come, leave, we're going to get used to it. It's going to come again, leave, and then it's going to be very, very bad, or it's going to have
Right.
these like indirect effects. So, fantastic answer. And thank you very much for doing this research because it's very, very, very important. And maybe something a little bit light and to take a step back from it. It can be kind of a heavy subject matter because it's climate science and climate change, but it is also a really fun and interesting subject to experience and to research. And you've gotten to work all over the world. I know that your field locations are like the Arctic tundra, equatorial Africa, subtropical Central America. Could you kind of speak to how your field work works, what goes into it, and then do you have a favorite or least favorite field location?
Spilling the tea on fieldwork.
Yeah.
So I would say that it depends on, right, the scope of the
Hmm.
project. So it could be anything from we pack the gear. So like whoever is
Hmm.
going, if I'm leading, maybe I would be the one packing all of the significant gear or the sampling equipment. Maybe that's the thing that actually takes the core that takes the
Hmm.
mud. Maybe it's the little vials that we subsample the mud into, or anything on that spectrum, or as part of a team, right? A small team, a large team, an international team. And so that's like one end of the spectrum to the expedition we went on, right? Which
Yeah.
is, highly organized, have done it many, many times. And you just bring your person and you
Yeah.
ready,
You just show
you
up,
plug in.
basically.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
plug in as the scientist and they say, here's your role, and then for 2 months in that case, you do that role and then you go back to your laboratory, with samples and start
Hmm.
working on your aspect of the research. And so anywhere on that continuum where it's like me packing a bag of like the actual equipment versus like me just
Hmm.
showing up is kind of all par for the course and stuff that I've done. I enjoy collaboration in all of its forms,
Mm.
be it with students, be it with other people's students, other professors, or kind of indigenous populations that I've gotten to work with. And so I would say that, all forms of getting to like talk to people and explain what we're doing and have them work with us is like why I
Cool.
do this. COVID was terrible. And you brought COVID up before that, because you really, I mean, yeah, I could still do my work, but without people, it turns out your day to day, like seeing and talking to people and going out and doing these expeditions and things, it just becomes flat, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting, but it's really the people, getting to work with people, that makes this so fun. People often think of those who work in labs as like kind of siloed. But I would say, so as far as my favorite, my field work for my PhD was in Eastern Africa, so on the Rift Lakes. And so
Cool.
I would say that still holds a kind of near and dear spot to my heart. So
Oh,
I love
yeah.
going to Eastern Africa and working with the people and the lakes and still do work like that today. But I absolutely do not have a least favorite. Like they're all my favorites.
Yeah, 100%.
um,
They're
yeah,
all your children in a way
exactly.
of
I was like,
like,
all my babies, I love you.
yeah.
No, I definitely, I think anytime you get to be in the field as a person who likes the field, it's a good day. It's just that I also like doing the lab work. So that is something I enjoy, is going out.
Mm,
But there are plenty of people who do like what I do, who utilize the archives, right? That, we
yeah.
go collect these mud samples, but they get archived for everyone to go and take samples from. Like anyone can make a
Yeah.
request and get these samples. And that is especially for people who like this work, but don't either weren't a part of it initially or don't
Hmm.
like going out in the field. So these samples are actually widely available, even if you weren't like pitching a tent out in the
Totally.
bog or like
Yeah.
going out on the boat. So,
Yeah, completely. I had one friend in grad school who wasn't a huge fan of going into the field, and he would always just be like, "Yeah, you're a sucker, man. Go get my data. Yeah, like have fun, like
yeah,
get a bunch of bug bites, have a great
yeah.
time, go enjoy." Because I love going into the field. Like I really love being outside.
I will
Like
say it
that's
slows you down, right? Like the fieldwork aspect, people are like, wait, where's the data? And you're like, so I had to go for a couple months and like gather and then
hmm
then we go and collect it again from the collected, and then you bring it back to the lab, and then you start thinking about getting data. And so
yeah.
it's, if the goal was quickness, right, it's definitely like extra fieldwork is not the key. But if the
No.
goal is, I mean, if that's the thing you like, figuring out ways to incorporate it into your work is really fun. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's definitely like two camps. I think there's always some people that are like, "Oh, you know what? We need more field work," and you're like, "Yes, you're right." Like it slows down everything. That you're like, "Do
mhm.
you, or do you just want to go on a
Right.
camping vacation and go to like a
Yeah.
cool location?"
Yeah.
No judgment there.
Right.
Like your field work happens to be in Australia, so like,
Yep.
yeah, if you have to go back to the field,
Right.
have fun. But
Yep. Yep. I mean, we have no
um,
room to talk. We started our expedition from Mauritius, right?
yeah,
So,
that's
yeah.
true. And then like ended in Cape Town. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, the terrible field
Tough, rough
location.
life. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you for that answer. How was studying the Rift Lakes? Like that is such a unique area in the world and such a unique system. No wonder that's going to be something that like lives in your mind. What a wonderful place to study for your PhD. That's
hmm
fantastic.
I loved it. Yeah, I went a couple of times. Malawi, Tanzania, and have had now the opportunity to go elsewhere. And so it's really, it's things that my students are working on. It's, projects we're thinking about for the future. It's kind of we did that expedition off the coast
Hmm.
of Africa. And so it's really this integration of the land and sea, right? The kind of back and forth between those environments that I still really enjoy doing to this day.
Oh, so cool. Yeah, that's a fantastic, like full scope of both land and sea. I love
Hmm
that. And I love that you also in that answer talked about people. And I think too, sometimes one stereotype of science is that like if you're again, if you're like in the lab, that you're more insular, more siloed, but that you also like that. Maybe you're more introverted and that's why you like lab work. But I do think science kind of loses its sparkle a little bit when you don't have collaboration. Because I think
hmm
that's the best part of it is talking to other experts or other people with a different specialty and being able to work as a team on something and collaborate as something. I think that's kind of fundamental to it. So
hmm
I couldn't agree more. And I know you've been working as a mentor and an advisor, but I
hmm
think this is a really, really cool project is that you're the advisor for Notre Dame's chapter for Engineers Without Borders. Could you kind of
hmm
speak to the work that you guys are doing right now in San Pedro de Suma in Ecuador? Because it's a cool project.
Yeah, I mean, so, what's unusual about this, right, is that I am not an engineer, but I am in a college of engineering and
Mhm.
a department that, includes earth science, civil engineering, and environmental engineering. And they, when I took on the role of advisor for the group, part of what got me here was actually the fact that I'm pretty comfortable traveling internationally.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of what kicked it off. Right. And so, and they, a lot of our projects are water based, like thinking about clean water projects around the world. And also the two things that I love most about the group and the work we do is, one, we work directly with the community. So we find out what it is that they're interested in and then work with them on these projects. So we're not kind of just dropping in and being like,
Yeah.
water well,
No,
boom,
no, no,
here.
no. Yeah.
And
No, no,
so I
absolutely
think
not.
I
Yeah.
think I think it really ties in kind of working directly with communities, and I
Hmm.
really love that sort of communication and that work. And
Hmm.
then the second thing is, kind of also, along those same lines, is that the students, right, who come from Notre Dame to wherever we're working, and like you said, we're in San Pedro de Suma in Ecuador right
Hmm.
now, they have all these skills from their coursework and they're going to apply it there. But then they're also learning about kind of the on the ground training that the engineers there, who know this landscape and
Hmm.
the water issues best. And so it's really this kind of cross learning sort of landscape that's happening in the field, and watching the students kind of come away with those ideas at the end that I think really is great to see. And so our project in Ecuador, again, it's clean water based. And
Yeah.
so we are the first portion we went, and they were really interested in having water towers, right? So
Hmm.
collection and then distribution of water. And so we worked with them to kind of design and build two water tanks right on towers. And then, recently went back and, post kind of the worst portion of COVID being over, kind of went down there to see, okay,
Hmm.
how's it doing? What is it that you're thinking about now that you have kind of this, like, what do you feel like the next steps are? And so the group will actually be traveling at the end of the summer to
Awesome.
kind of investigate, yeah, what the next steps will be. So it's another, these, like, investigative trips
Yeah.
to kind of talk with the community before an implementation actually happens. And so we
Yeah.
do a lot of these go and chat, meet with people, survey the people in the landscape. And then once it's decided kind of what it is that's of interest, work with the design, go back and do an implementation. So,
That It's so amazing. Like that's exactly how community work should work when it in terms of like science community work. So it makes me so happy to hear that because I think you're right. I think like community involvement is so key and necessary to understand to have a right solution, right? Because you're
mm-hmm,
not going to really know the landscape that well or what's needed or what's been the history of the space or history of water quality and treatment. So
mm-hmm,
having that involvement with the community and having those kind of negotiation checks of like what do you actually need and investigation checks is so important. But I love that your students also get to have real world application of their skills, but they
mm-hmm.
also get to have that kind of on the ground field learning because field learning is completely different than book learning, right? Like
Yep.
it's where everything goes wrong and you have to try to problem solve it, but you also try to you get to learn from like local experts and from people who
Right.
actually have been doing this for years of their life and learn
Right.
directly from them. So it's super powerful and a really cool initiative, Melissa. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the lived experience, right? I mean, there's nothing like it, right? They are the experts. And so, I
Hmm.
mean, I'm sure we're not doing it perfectly, I'm sure, and there's always more to learn, but really going in with the best of intentions of that community conversation at all times.
No, I think that's so important and such a cool initiative. And maybe just could you speak to how has been your experience being an advisor? I could see it being like incredibly uplifting. And then could you describe the importance of community work because I know it's really important to you within sciences and then like the impact of what these initiatives can have.
Yeah, I mean, so being the advisor of this group, right,
Hmm.
they're super self motivated. Like, members of the group obviously turn over as people graduate and that sort
Hmm.
of thing, but they always, they've made it so that there's continuity, in the leadership team, year to year. And so it's really kind of fun to watch them kind of take off, and me just to I attend some meetings, and we have,
Yeah.
Zoom calls because we have a professional engineer we work with directly. And so, we'll kind of get together and have those conversations. But I say that it's really student led, and I'm just here. I joke that my goal is to bring home the same number of students I left with. Um,
It's a good goal.
but
That's
but
honestly a very good goal. Yeah.
yeah, but it's really, I go as, a mentor in the field and then work with them throughout the year. And so, I've learned a lot myself, right, as a
Hmm.
non-engineer, but someone who knows about, the
Water.
geology and the earth science and the
Yeah.
water aspect. So yeah, it's really good I enjoy traveling with the group and going and making sure that like everything goes as well as it can be and keep the students safe and then return to campus after.
No, for sure. And again, like I just think it's so cool. And maybe could you speak to a little bit about like the community
Yeah.
impact and like community and initiatives, and maybe like why are they so important in geosciences for community initiatives? And then what would you hope that the future of communication and science and community kind of goes?
It's super heartening. I'll kind of start at the back of that and work forward.
Yeah,
So this,
please.
it's super heartening where we're at now, which is recognizing that, especially for those of us who do international work, we recognize that you have to work with the local communities. Like, why are you dropping into like this community and telling them how to
What
do
to do?
things, or
Yeah.
taking back their samples and not being involved with scientists on the ground there? And so I like where we're at now, and we have a lot more work to do, obviously, but it's a change in the community that I'm really glad to see. We're trending towards recognizing how critical this is.
No, I love it. I love it. And thank you very much for that answer. That's
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. And you can tell throughout this entire interview, I think the amount of times that you've said mentorship, and to
Mm-hmm.
say like really what drives you is seeing your students grow and become better at their science, better people, probably more confident. And I just think that that's a beautiful thing. Again, I think it means that you're a stellar teacher. And then maybe in that spirit, could you maybe give some advice and maybe some mentorship to if there's any young women listening today? Because I think like one of the big things in geoscience that has changed is obviously the number of women within it. But in my opinion, I think that there's still a long way to go in
Mm-hmm.
geosciences and in STEM in general. Could you maybe give advice to those young women listening today?
Yeah, there's so, right, the pressures and the pitfalls are so wide, right? We could just talk for hours, right, about
Yeah.
about kind of the,
Yeah.
and we as a community, right, talk about everything from the leaky pipeline. Is that the issue? Is that
Mhm.
real? Is that not where the issue is? And so wide-ranging advice is still going back to like follow your gut, like follow what you're really interested in, find mentorship that works for you. Multiple mentors, one person is probably not going to fit all of your
Mhm.
needs. Find people who speak to your lived experience,
Mhm.
and that's slowly becoming better and better for everyone, but it is
Yeah.
it is a slow move.
Still
It's a
hard.
slow
Yeah.
crawl for
Yes.
everyone
Agreed.
seeing themselves in a
Mhm.
mentor. And so find the people who recognize the kind of talents you bring, and
Mhm.
can help you get where you want to go and aren't like in competition with you. I think
Yeah.
there are people who feel like their mentor is looking out for themselves and not for them. Find the person who is looking
Yeah.
out for you. And so I'd say, academics may not be for you, but that doesn't mean that a graduate degree isn't. So
Mhm.
that would be the other thing I would say kind of generally, is that the graduate work is a great stepping stone for lots of different industries, not just staying on in academics. And so I always tell people that, I'm not here to make little ones of me, right? Like I'm not here to just like
It's not an ego thing. Yeah.
reproduce me in the field.
Yeah.
And so far I've had students who've gone out and worked for government, for companies, the military, like everything in between, right? And so just recognizing that the skills you gain from whatever your work is can be
Mhm.
broadly applied, like organization or like connecting the dots, or whatever that advanced skill is, can apply to more things than I could even enumerate, because I don't even know them
Yeah.
all. What I would say is that we're all taught, or at least when I was a kid, it's like doctor, lawyer,
Mhm.
teacher, and now like you space those out and there's like 40 million things between them that you can also do. The sky is the limit as far as what this work can be applied to. And so don't let anyone, including yourself, hold you back, right? Keep
Yeah.
keep trucking. So
I love a keep trucking
yeah.
as an advice. I think keep trucking is a great advice. And I think what always brings me a lot of hope too is one, the breadth of kind of opportunities and occupations that you can take with kind of any degree, and especially with a master's degree. Cause I agree with you. I think that it does open a lot of doors, and it
Mhm.
it just brings a lot of skills, even if you're not going to go into academia. I mean, I got my job in IDP only because of my master's degree.
Hmm.
That's why that door was open to me. So I'm a component of that, but I love the idea as well of not only is there so many occupations, there's so many occupations that we don't know yet because they don't exist yet.
Right.
Technology is also changing. This is a space that's really going to advance really quickly in the next like 10, 20 years. You're going to probably need natural sciences in a lot of different types of industries. There's so many jobs that don't exist yet. There's a lot of companies that don't exist yet. So I think, yeah, keep trucking, find what you like. I love that advice. I think it's fantastic. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today. I had so much fun reconnecting, and it was so nice seeing you. And I loved learning more about your mentorship and your research and your community involvement. And it was lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, ditto. It's so great to see you, and I love what you're doing, and I wish you all the best. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. So thank you again, Melissa. I love it. I'm probably going to send you so many emails about the water table and more research, and I'm sure we'll have more questions from people, and I'll probably send them your way. But thank you again for coming on, and thank you guys for listening. This is the Smoko podcast. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week. Bye.